According to the rumors, the Dragon family is an organization composed of old families that consider themselves above the current political conflict between mainland China and Taiwan. Between the world wars, China's finance minister T.V. Soong and Henry Morgenthau, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, struck a deal to protect Chinese assets in case of a widespread war with Japan. The U.S. purchased about 50 million ounces of silver and leased a large amount of gold from the nationalist Chinese government. These metals were exchanged for certificates and sent to the U.S. The certificates allegedly became a cornerstone of Taiwan's wealth. When the Nationalist Party fled to Taiwan, they appointed the Dragon family to safeguard these remaining certificates and wait for the time to redeem them with interest. It's an intriguing story, but there are several problems. First, the Federal Reserve claims the specific currency described in this lawsuit doesn't exist. Secondly, the alleged bonds and certificates have several noticeable spelling errors. Those who believe the bonds are genuine say these errors are purposeful as a way to keep the US from having to repay the debt. Third, the story is metamorphosized as more and more conspiracy theorists add fanciful and unproven spins on the basic tale. For example, researchers like Benjamin Fulford see this case as a hint of something much bigger, perhaps even the global collapse of the current monetary system. But an odd story hit the papers in 2009. Two Japanese nationals were detained in Italy. Originally, reports claimed the two men were trying to enter Switzerland with $134.5 billion in US bonds. Later amendments claimed these bonds were fakes, and the story disappeared almost entirely from the news. During 2009, at least two other similar busts occurred, each swiftly forgotten in the news cycles. This wasn't the last we'd hear of these mysterious bonds. In 2012, Italian prosecutors said they seized $6 trillion in US bonds from safety deposit boxes at a Zurich bank. The US government also confirmed these alleged 1934 bonds were fakes.
Over the years, there's another classification of gold, and this is called the global debt facility. After World War II, all these people that have these massive riches from gold from Asia, which they had hundreds of thousands of metric tons of gold in different periods. It's not like 9999 fine. It's just stuff that has been created over hundreds of years. Offered this gold up to bail out the world after World War II. And they created what was called the Global Debt Facility, and collateral. This was the collateral for the debt facility. They provided, was it 86,000 metric tons of gold to bail out the nations of the world, refinance after World War II, and etc. They put forth their gold, and they were issued deposit receipts, similar to these bonds that we have here for their gold. But then the banks decided they were going to hold on to the gold for themselves, and they didn't apply it to the nations and all the national debt, and they didn't use it to rebuild the nations. They just kept the money. And so this gold, which was to bail out the nations of the world and actually zero out the debt of all kinds of nations in the world, which had been offered, has been hijacked and controlled by several major banks. That gold is now coming forth. It is going to be a part of the restructuring. That gold is now coming forth. They're dragging it back from the banks. Here's what the banks did. They signed an agreement with the parties that brought the gold in and deposited this gold. And sometimes they deposit 20,000 tons in a bank, 10,000 tons, etc., of metric tons of gold in a bank. And the bank would issue them documents saying what had been done and making it, and they would have a document for the person and they have a document for the bank. Now in each document, they created spelling errors, misspelled words, all kinds of stuff, and in each document. And the parties were told at the time that this was a special code that was put in the documents so that the documents wouldn't be forged, or and they would have an identical key there. So what happened was people came back later and said, look, you guys haven't paid us. We haven't been getting the interest on what we've given, and you haven't used the gold for the purposes that you said that we were going to use it for, and we want our money. And they said, well, show us what you've got. And they showed them their document, and they said, well, look, you have all these spelling errors in your document. This absolutely has been forged by a very ignorant Filipino or Indonesian person who doesn't even understand English. And therefore they said, we cannot verify that you are the owner of the gold. And so because they couldn't verify that they were the owner, the bank got to keep it and do whatever they want. So they used it as collateral for loans, and they used it any way they wanted. They leased it out to others. They did all kinds of stuff with this gold. So basically what's happening is the banks are being called on this that are involved. Citibank, HSBC, all the big banks are all involved in this. Wells Fargo, all the big banks are involved in this situation. So they're being called on this, as this gold is being coughed up and being put a part of the new reconciliation jubilee bailout of nations. So what this new thing is, they're putting all the debts together, and they're putting all these assets together, and they're going to try and cancel things out and set it up at that particular time.